last spring and summer, well, more spring maybe than summer, when the issue of Russell Wilson's future in Seattle was front and center, and he wound up staying put. But I think the general consensus amongst everyone, certainly observers, is that this season would have a lot to do with whether Russell stays put or wants to force his way out. And if you had told anybody back in the spring that the longest regular season ever unfolding with Seattle clinching Russell's first losing season in Seattle with 3 games left to play, we would have said that, well, that's that. What about now that that reality is hit? What do you think?
Oh, I think, and I was one of the people last year that said the right thing for Seattle to do is to ride this thing out because they've got a win-now team with a 70-year-old coach, and some core players that are aging. Ride this thing out and get Russell Wilson on the team and compete like hell to try to win a championship in 2021 and figure out where you are after that. I'm not in that place anymore. I mean, I think, this is sort of feels like it's coming to its conclusion, and then maybe the best thing for everybody involved is a clean break. And I can tell you, Rich, unequivocally, part of where Russell was last January, I think it was sort of looking at it as this is the start of the second half of my career. And he was looking at things like, am I going to be a Hall of Famer? How am I viewed? What's my legacy? What sort of position am I going to be in to compete for championships? And that meant not just looking at what he was doing, which he did. It was how am I training? How am I eating? How am I getting myself ready for the season? Who am I working with? All that stuff. So you look at all that on an individual level. But it was also, is everything around me right to be in a position to compete for a championship and to become maybe a league MVP, which he hasn't done, and to ultimately wind up in the Hall of Fame. And if he was asking those questions and still trying to force his way out, or at least rumbling about it last year, they were in the playoffs, and I believe they won 12 games in the division last year. What do you think he's going to be when they're 5-9? You know what I mean? So I think that this thing is sort of careening now towards, the exit ramp. And it just feels to me like we're going to be at a point in January, maybe it'll be like Detroit and Stafford, where, they have a meeting at the end of the season and they come to a conclusion. What's best for everybody is that we just go our separate ways now. And it would give the Seahawks a chance to trade him when he's still got 2 years left on his contract, which would probably allow them to get true value for him. So my guess is that where we are right now is moving very quickly towards Russell Wilson probably being the first of those quarterbacks to hit the trade market in January. And by the way, being there first can actually really benefit you. I think Detroit benefited last year from getting ahead of all those other, situations where they were able to get Stafford out there early enough. There were a lot of bidders on him, and they got a good price for him.
So what does it look like? What does something like that look like once it is known, at least amongst the burning up phone lines that Russell Wilson can be in fact had, and let's start the bidding. Who makes those phone calls, do you think? So
we had 4 teams, Rich, that were, I think, sort of involved at some level in Deshaun Watson. And I think those 4 teams are still there as far as just if there are veteran quarterbacks available that are of that level, they'll be in. And so Miami, Philadelphia, Carolina, Denver, I think would all at least explore it. And then I think we'd be looking at some other teams where they've got young quarterbacks and the decision to whether or not to pay them is coming. And so now for those teams, it's what do we do? Do we move forward with our young quarterback, or with all these accomplished veterans available, do we decide to flip them out? Sort of like what the Rams did last year and flipping out Jared Goff for Matthew Stafford. And so, the Giants, I think he'd have an interest in going to New York. Would the Giants be at the point where it's it makes sense for us to flip out Daniel Jones for Russell Wilson now? Cleveland, I think would be an interesting one because they're having to come to a decision point on Baker Mayfield. So those would be 6 teams that I think would be in it. And then I think you have to consider teams like New Orleans, who are, I think in tricky positions from a cap standpoint. Pittsburgh's another one where you look at them and you say, okay, like, yeah, their situation's a little sideways, but creatively, could they do something? Because those could be places that Russell himself might want to go.
And I'd do that if I was Seattle, certainly because they don't have any draft choices in the first round this year. They can certainly replenish immediately, and then for the future, what would that mean with Pete Carroll? What do you think? Do you think Pete would even?
To me, it's a fascinating question. Does he have the stomach for a rebuild?
That's
you
what
know what
it
I
is.
mean? Like,
right.
Now that said, like, I think we would have asked the same question of Belichick a year ago, where their roster was aging. They were able to flip it pretty quick.
Yep.
And they have some sharp personnel people up there. I mean, you know, John Schneider, and they've been in a little bit of a slump from a draft standpoint of late, but those things turn. You know what I mean? That
Right.
can be cyclical. So, like, I think that becomes the first question if you are going to move on from Russell Wilson is, does your 70-year-old head coach who's won a Super Bowl and been to 2 for you, does he have the stomach to go through what would be probably a pretty significant rebuild? And, I mean, like, that's the thing about their roster, Rich. Like, I'll ask you, how many guys that are young, that are young, would you look at as, like, building blocks, like cornerstones there? Guys that are, you could say, like, that guy could be around in 5 years. I mean, to me, I look at it, DK Metcalf and Jamal Adams, and maybe that's it, right? Like, Bobby Wagner's older, Dwayne Brown's older. Like, I look at their roster, and it's like, I don't know, like, how many guys are there now where you say, yeah, 3 or 4 years from now, this guy's going to be a cornerstone on the roster. So, you know, I think that they need capital, and they need capital to turn it around. Like, they need to have the capital to go get younger. And, I mean, obviously the easiest way to create that capital would be to trade your franchise quarterback.
Hey, you watched all the way to the end. Thanks for that. Watch more right here.